Thanks for coming. So today, 12 citizens from Philadelphia, from a variety of backgrounds, both culturally, educationally, and otherwise, returned a verdict in a common pleas court in Philadelphia in the amount of $10 million in favor of my client, Khanefah Boozer, and as importantly, sent a very loud, strong, and clear message that change is necessary immediately in the Philadelphia Police Department in the areas of training, supervision, hiring, how they do their jobs, and how the chain of command vets cases as well as problem officers. And I'm proud to have represented Mr. Boozer, stood behind him, and fought his case. I would also just note that, you know, we're having dialogue right now about criminal justice reform, and we're discussing it via social media, a lot of celebrities, politicians that are discussing it, and that's good and it's important. But change comes about, unfortunately, sometimes slowly through the political process. And today, 12 citizens from Philadelphia sent a message that I believe will bring change much faster. It's a message that should be heard loud and clear by Mayor Kenney. It's a message that should be heard loud and clear by Commissioner Ross. It's a message that should be heard loud and clear throughout the city of Philadelphia, that this will not be tolerated by the citizens of Philadelphia. And I believe, as I told the jury in my closing argument, that they have the loudest voice and the strongest voice, and they're in the best position to send a message that this was very, very clear, that Mr. Boozer spent 3 years and 9 months of his life behind bars for a crime he did not commit. He was obviously factually innocent. He was obviously factually innocent from the get-go. There was also a complete breakdown and failure in investigating his case. Mr. Boozer, on the night in question, gave a full statement to the Philadelphia police, told them exactly what had happened, provided all the information they needed, and there was no follow-up done. And as a result of that, as well as issues with the bail system and pretrial delays, Mr. Boozer spent 3 years and 9 months in a jail cell in Philadelphia. So he certainly also would like to thank his family. He'd like to thank the jurors. I know Mr. Boozer wants the jurors to know he appreciates their service and their duty. He'd like to thank Thomas Burke, who was the criminal defense attorney that was ultimately appointed by a judge to represent Mr. Boozer, and did so successfully. And if you have questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Who's the judge?
It was Judge Sean Kennedy.
So, Bob, the bail was set at $500,000, and your client, to be released, had to post 10% of that, wasn't able to. That's why it was in prison for nearly 4 years. Can you talk about what efforts were made to raise that money?
You know, I think most ordinary citizens in Philadelphia can identify with the fact that $50,000 is a lot of money. Mr. Boozer was born and raised here in the city, graduated from Fells High School, and was employed full-time at Home Depot at the time that he was wrongfully arrested. Under no circumstances would he have $50,000 to post on that bail, and part of the delay was also a struggle with finances to afford an attorney. And there just wasn't a mechanism to review that bail, because when you're accused of shooting at a Philadelphia police officer, even if you didn't do it, the bail is going to be set extraordinarily high, and there's not a process in place to review the facts of the case to see whether they're commensurate with the amount of the bail. And so the system failed him at a number of levels.
Can you talk about your reaction to the verdict?
No comment.
Yeah, Mr. Boozer's still processing right now what happened, and you know, he spoke to the jury and has really been eloquent about the fact that he doesn't harbor any ill will toward the officers, and he's a very, very positive man. Told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that there was a time he was very angry when he was in jail, and he's moved past that, and he doesn't wish any ill will, but he certainly hopes that this doesn't happen to another citizen of Philadelphia.
Bob, your client has certificates in carpentry and also certificates.
He's a barber as well. That's right.
Can you talk about what he was doing, like what he was doing in his life right before the arrest? And if he doesn't want to address it himself, can you tell us what his plans are now that he's released?
Sure. So Mr. Boozer was working toward purchasing and opening a barbershop. He was going to build it out himself using his carpentry skills. He was working at Home Depot as part of that, and he was engaged in that full-time at the time that he was stopped on January 22nd, 2011, and wrongfully arrested. And so obviously that dream came crashing down. Hopefully the jury's verdict will put Mr. Boozer in a position that although he can't get those 3.5 years back, perhaps he'll live a life that he wouldn't otherwise have been able to live, and hopefully finish that dream of purchasing a barbershop and running it himself.
On the legal end of things, so it was one officer who ended up being the person that was sued in this case, is that right? And not the city?
So there were there were 2 other police officers, one of whom was the detective assigned to the case. The court released the detective at the close of the plaintiff's case, and as I said to the jury in my closing argument, there were a number of things that were not done. Nothing was done by the detective in this case, and there was an extreme breakdown. It was the judge's decision to determine what went to the jury, but I hope that with this verdict being returned and the Philadelphia Police Department, the mayor's office, and others in the city taking a look at this case as they'll be forced to, that they'll see that had the detective simply done her job on the night of the incident, that there's a significant chance Mr. Boozer would not have spent 3.5 years, 3 years and 9 months in prison. Obviously, it was the lie of the police officer that put him there, but had the detective done her job, perhaps things would have turned out differently.
Bob, can you talk a little bit about the circumstances that led to the arrest? So I'm reading from some of the civil documents that your client was accompanying another car of friends home to make sure they got home safely, and that followed a night of drinking or a night of just hanging out with his friends. But your client doesn't drink and was not
Correct.
drinking then, and the shot was fired from the other car, not your client's car, but you say the police officer, Ryan Waltman, framed your client and said that, in fact, he had a gun and shot at the officer, Waltman. Could you just walk us through the facts that led up to that?
So what the evidence in the case made clear was Mr. Boozer, who as Mr. Allen said, does not drink, was out with some friends on the evening of the 21st of January, early morning hours, 22nd. His friends had a little too much to drink. He offered them a ride home, to which they declined, but he followed the car to make sure they got home safely. And upon pulling on the block, one of Mr. Boozer's friends, who was seated in a different car, fired a shot out of his driver's door window up into the air. Officer Waltman at some point came on the block. My client was leaving because he felt his friends just needed to go inside and go to sleep for the evening. He was apparently seen getting in his car. Philadelphia police officers asked him to pull over, which he did, and the next thing he knew, he was being accused of having pointed a firearm at Officer Waltman and firing. And so in addition to the fact that my client didn't commit any crime out there, the facts that were alleged by Officer Waltman and given to the detective never happened. And that was what the evidence showed clearly. Mr. Boozer, I would note, also gave Philadelphia police the names and addresses of his friend who did fire the shot up in the air, as well as other witnesses, and that was never followed up on by Philadelphia police, unfortunately. And there was testimony at the trial. The detectives testified under oath that she didn't follow up because she took the word of Officer Waltman because he's a police officer. And that's exactly the kind of issue that needs to be reformed and needs to be talked about.
Was she the only defendant at the time of the verdict?
At the time of the verdict, Officer Waltman was the only defendant, correct.
And he has not been disciplined, and he's still on the force. What do you think that says about systemic issues? Can you elaborate a little more on that with PPD in terms of disciplining officers who are clearly using their power?
Sure. I know Mr. Boozer is hopeful that what comes of this case partly is that his case gets reviewed. And, what it says is that the jury got to review all of the evidence, and I think their verdict makes very, very, very clear how they felt about what happened in this case. And the fact that it took a Philadelphia jury returning a $10 million verdict in favor of Mr. Boozer for somebody to stop and take a look at this case is highly disturbing, highly disturbing. And so hopefully, as we said, the next Khanefah Boozer either won't happen or the case will get vetted at a much earlier point, and that person won't serve 3 years and 9 months in a prison.
The city just emailed and said they now plan to appeal. Can you talk about your level of confidence that the $10 million verdict will survive appeal attempts?
I think that, the verdict speaks for itself in terms of the clarity with which the jury saw the facts. when you return a verdict with $5 million in compensatory damages and $5 million in punitive damages. I don't think there's any lack of clarity as to what the jury saw and what they found the facts to be. These were a very sober group of 12 people from a cross-section of the city. It was a credibility call as to whether the officer was telling the truth. Obviously, the jury found that he was not, and we're very, very, very confident that any court looking at this will see that this jury verdict not only was clear on the evidence, but is an extraordinarily important verdict, not just here in Philadelphia, but nationwide. This is a message that should be sent across America, because this dialogue is taking place throughout the United States of America. And so Mr. Boozer's hopeful that this works to the benefit of citizens all over the United States. And you know, we're fortunate to have the opportunity to talk to you and hopefully let others hear about what happened in this case, because his innocence is not in question. It's just a question of how this happened.
I had a dumb question. If he was the only defendant, does he have to pay?
So, you know, the city of Philadelphia will be responsible for working with Officer Waltman, I'm sure, in the police department in determining how to take care of the award that the jury returned in favor of Mr. Boozer. And that's a better question for them than it is for us.
You just had a statement from the district attorney saying they will review this civil and criminal case against Mr. Boozer. If they find out the officer engaged in misconduct, they'll disclose that to you. Is that encouraging to hear?
I think any review from anybody in the criminal justice system that wants to shine light on a situation that so obviously is troubling is helpful. There's no question about that. Officer Waltman testified under oath on multiple occasions as to a set of facts and circumstances that the jury did not believe ever occurred. And so District Attorney Krasner's office reviewing that can only be a positive thing. And hopefully, though, it spreads to other cases where lawyers or citizens or other people bring concerns forward. We look at them, we vet them, and we take each case on its merits and make good, smart decisions so that the kind of thing that happened to Mr. Boozer happens less. And listen, as I told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and I think they know, it is a hard job. Being a police officer is a really, really, really difficult job. But part of the difficulty is that they're the individuals that ensure that we do live in a law-abiding society that's not lawless, but they also have the responsibility of ensuring that each of our individual rights are protected at the same time. And so there's a high responsibility, and it's important for those in charge, whether it's at the department or the district attorney's office, to make sure that that balance is struck.
Can you talk about some of your client's personal circumstances? Does he have any children? Is he going to stay in Philly? Who is he living with now?
So, you know, unfortunately, tragically, Mr. Boozer's mother died while he was incarcerated wrongfully. He had a sister who died while he was incarcerated wrongfully. I think that weighed on the jury as well. He does have a family, young child, and I think right now he's just going to live his life the way he has been, one day at a time. And,
how old's the kid? Is it
a youngster, about 2.
boy, girl?
A daughter.
Do you think that the high-profile issue with Starbucks in any way, you know, came in and impacted the jury?
I really believe that this jury verdict is about the facts in this case because they were so egregious. But I think it's important that the conscience of our city and our nation, you know, is thinking about these matters, and you know, social media does help to share the message. You know, when these things do happen. So I wouldn't connect it to Starbucks, but I would certainly say that I think in a very positive way, people are conscious of the potential problems that exist in the criminal justice system if cases are not handled properly.
Sorry, but just to clarify, if he was in jail for 3 years and 9 months, his daughter's older than 2.
How old's your daughter, Mr. Boozer? Old? All right, he'd rather not share.
Just a young daughter?
Just a young daughter,
Okay.
yeah.
Do you think there was any piece of evidence or expert or piece of testimony that really convinced the jury?
I don't think it was any one piece of evidence. I think that all of the evidence made clear, particularly the individual who the police knew about from that night, who did fire the shot from inside of a car up in the air, which, you know, proved there had been no shots fired at the officer. I think Mr. Boozer's testimony which was enormously credible. And obviously the jury did not believe Officer Waltman, who did testify under oath to a set of circumstances that we do not believe ever occurred.
And I guess what was her defense? What was the main argument that they tried to?
Officer Waltman continues, this is part of the troubling aspect, Officer Waltman continues to testify that Mr. Boozer had a firearm and pointed it at him and fired a shot at him. And that was Officer Waltman's defense.
And your client had no gun. I mean, how does this even happen?
That was Officer Waltman's testimony under oath. And that's how it happens.
Who is the attorney for Officer Waltman?
Officer Waltman was represented by Kevin Hubbard and Mark McGuire from the city of Philadelphia.
Were there any settlement, negotiations?
I mean, at this point, it's not something that I usually talk about. Certainly not anything that would compensate 3 years and 9 months in jail for a crime that didn't happen and that you didn't commit.
How long did the trial last?
Approximately three days.
And Bob, just to clarify, because it was an intentional tort, there's no statutory cap that would take the $10 million down automatically as a matter of state law, right?
Correct, because the actions of the officer in filing what's called a malicious prosecution, having somebody prosecuted maliciously without facts, is an intentional act. It's not covered by any caps.